In a small village clinging to the memory of time, where stories intertwine with the daily noise of life, lived the Smith family. A large family of 10 children, 5 brothers and 5 sisters, headed by the father, George, and the mother, Linda. On the outside, the family seemed like any other large family, united and strong. But behind the walls of their modest clay house, the story was entirely different. George, the father, was a man with a short temper, working in the fields from dawn until sunset. The harshness of life had made him a tough man, but he lost the tenderness his children so desperately needed. As for Linda, she was a woman of great endurance, but over time, she broke under the weight of daily battles with her husband, though her love for her children never wavered. The troubles between George and Linda began long ago when George lost a piece of land inherited from his father due to poor money management. That loss was the start of endless quarrels. Linda believed George was responsible for what happened, while George blamed her and her constant demands for a decent life for their children. In this tense environment, the children grew up in a constant struggle, torn between loyalty to their father or mother and trying to survive the effects of their parents' conflict. Michael, the eldest son, bore the burden of the family from a young age. After witnessing the daily fights between his parents, he decided to escape, not physically, but mentally. He worked in neighboring farms, earning money to avoid his father's yelling and his mother's tears. Michael dreamed of a life far from the chaos, but he always felt guilty for leaving his siblings to shoulder the burden alone. Sophia, on the other hand, was closest to her mother. A gentle soul, she suffered from mental strain due to the constant arguments. She took on the role of a second mother to her siblings but felt like a victim of the toxic environment. Over time, she developed insomnia and a deep fear of marriage. Dreading the possibility of repeating her mother's tragedy, Ryan, the second son, was entirely different. A rebellious and angry young man. He inherited his father's fiery temper and his mother's quiet resentment. He skipped school and got into fights with everyone. Despite his tough demeanor, he felt powerless and frustrated. Unlike the others, Lila, the third daughter, sought to escape reality through writing. She wrote short stories about perfect families living in peace. No one read her stories, but she felt these pages were her only way to breathe. As for Ethan, the youngest sibling, he was the most affected. A small child who didn't understand why his parents were always yelling. He only wished for a quiet home. He would hide in the corners whenever a fight broke out, clutching a small toy Michael had given him. The story escalates when George decides to sell the family house to pay off his debts. His children, especially Michael and Sophia, oppose this decision, and the conflict between George and Linda intensifies. Linda finally decides to leave the house with her children. But where could they go? At the same time, relationships among the siblings began to unravel. Ryan became increasingly aggressive, planning to leave home for good. Meanwhile, Sophia had a nervous breakdown for the first time, leading to her being hospitalized. That night, the sky was covered in heavy clouds, mirroring the sorrow inside the house. Linda sat in a corner of the room, clutching her hands tightly. Silent tears streamed down her face as she reflected on the years spent with George, from the day they married until now. She recalled his early promises. "I'll make you the happiest woman in the world." But now, all she could see were tears and destruction. Michael lay in another corner, wide awake. He could hear his mother's muffled sobs and felt powerless. Since the age of 12, he had tried to act as the man of the house, mediating between his parents. But he now realized this was beyond his ability. When he approached his mother and asked what she was thinking, he saw the answer in her eyes. "We have to leave." He immediately understood that this was not an escape but a fight for survival. Sophia woke up when she overheard their whispered conversation. She approached cautiously, her voice trembling with fear. "Where will we go? Will Dad come looking for us?" Linda replied in a shaky voice. "I don't know, my dear, but we'll be okay as long as we're together." One by one, the other children woke up. Even Ryan, usually defiant, didn't argue when he realized they were leaving. He carried a quiet anger toward his father but concealed it behind his outward defiance. Ethan, too young to understand everything, looked at his mother and asked innocently, "Will we come back tomorrow?" Linda gave him a sad smile. "We're going to a better place, sweetheart." They arrived at the home of Linda's sister, Emma, who welcomed them with open arms. Emma knew about the troubles between Linda and George but hadn't expected things to escalate this far. The room Emma offered was small, with just 2 beds. Michael and Ryan chose to sleep on the floor, leaving the beds for Sophia, Lila, Linda, and little Ethan. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than the years they had spent in the suffocating atmosphere of their old home. That first night, they sat around a simple dinner table. Emma tried to lighten the mood with small talk, but the weight of their emotions was evident in their silence. The next morning, Michael began searching for a job. He visited shop after shop, offering to work for any wage. When he finally secured a position at a small grocery store, he returned home with a faint smile for the first time in a long time. "Mom, I can help now," he said. Lila adjusted more easily to their new life. She discovered a small library in the neighborhood, a sanctuary where she could spend hours writing stories about happy families, escaping her painful reality. For Ryan, the adjustment was much harder. Feeling trapped in their new home, he took to the streets, befriending some boys in the neighborhood, some of whom had a negative influence on him. Sophia devoted herself to helping her mother and aunt but remained haunted by memories of her parents' fights, which often resurfaced in her dreams. When George discovered his family was gone, his first reaction was rage. How dare Linda take the children and leave? But over time, that rage turned into something else: loneliness. The house was empty and cold. Every corner reminded him of his children, their laughter, their fights, even their cries. He saw Ethan's toy lying on the floor and one of Lila's notebooks left open on the table. Slowly, he began to realize he had lost something precious. After weeks of searching in the village, A neighbor hinted that Linda might be staying with her sister in the city. It took George weeks to gather enough money for the trip, but he was determined to find them, no matter what. When George knocked on Emma's door, Linda never expected to see him. She had begun to believe he wouldn't come after them. When she opened the door, fear and anger filled her heart. She looked at her children and asked them to go to the other room. But Michael stood firm, saying, "Mom, if you're going to talk to him, we won't leave you alone." The entire family sat in the small living room as George tried to speak. For the first time in his life, he felt weak in front of them. His voice broke as he said, "I'm sorry." The words were heavy on him, but they came from the depths of his heart. He spoke of his loneliness and his desire to fix his mistakes. But Michael wasn't ready to forgive so easily. "Sorry? Do you think that's enough? After all the yelling, all the violence, can we forget it with just one word?" George lowered his gaze and replied, "I'm not asking you to forgive me now. But I want a chance. I want to be a father to you again." George rented a small house near Emma's. He worked tirelessly in a factory during the day and spent his evenings trying to reconnect with his children. Michael noticed the change in his father but remained cautious, needing more time to trust him. Ryan, on the other hand, was more open, accompanying his father to the factory and seeing how hard he worked. Sophia began to find some solace in the family's gradual mending, though the scars of the past lingered. Lila found inspiration in this transformation and began writing a new story titled, "The Father Who Returned." 2 years later, the family gathered to celebrate Ethan's birthday. It was a simple celebration, but love and warmth filled the air. For the first time in years, George and Linda sat together without arguing, while their children laughed around the table. Life remained challenging, but they had learned an important lesson. A family can overcome anything if they stick together.
Thank you for your wonderful support. If you have ideas or suggestions for future videos, write to me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell. See you in the next video.